Welcome. I am author D.M. Patterson, and this video is going to be slightly different from the other ones I do. If this is your first time watching a YouTube video of mine, I have created this YouTube channel so I could give writing advice, talk about writing techniques, and also share some of my own writing here on this channel. This video is going to be different from talking about any writing techniques or advice about the writing journey because I have decided to talk about my journey in Europe here on this channel and also share pictures here. I figured this would be the easiest medium to let people know what I thought about our journey, show pictures, and let people see it at their time, at their pace. I will be breaking these videos up into sections based on the cities that we were in because we visited quite a few cities and I don't want to try shoving all of that into one video. Also, for those of you who are new, this is Sasha. She likes to join me on my videos, and if I try to lock her out of the room, she will yell at the door. Without further ado, I am starting with Amsterdam, Holland, because that is where we flew into and that's where we began our journey. The first thing that stuck out to me about Amsterdam was the structure of the buildings. It was crazy to see how many very tall and thin buildings were just slammed one right next to the other. I noticed as we were walking down the streets that the buildings also seemed like they were following a river, and they curled in such a way that if you turned around to take a picture of the alley, all you could see was parts of the building and a turn. And I later learned that because a lot of the buildings were initially built on a canal, and where we were walking today, where there's cobblestone, there used to be water. So it was really incredible to see how these buildings had been built in such a way that they just sort of wound their way around, and then these very tall, skinny buildings were just slammed one right next to the other. And then we also saw some buildings that were starting to lean like this. They weren't straight up anymore, and I definitely wondered what it was like to walk around in those inside, but obviously we couldn't go into any of those buildings. But the remnants of these were built because it used to be on water. It was incredible to see the architecture. Fortunately, we also had some absolutely beautiful weather when we started out, so being outside and walking around and looking at all the sights was perfect. It was perfect weather for it, and that's what we really enjoyed doing. One of the first things we did was go to the Nemo Museum, which is a science and technology museum catered towards children. So our 6-year-old daughter, who was with us, really enjoyed playing with all the tactile things that they had out there. They had things set up for children to figure out. Their games and everything were all geared towards a problem that needed to be solved. And my daughter really enjoyed all of that hands-on, seeing her, if she pushed this button, this happened, and then learning a little bit more about reactions of things. We really enjoyed that. We also had the great fortune of being there during their last showing of this really big Rube Goldberg setup that they had, and it took up most of the bottom floor, and there even were pieces that they had hung up up into the second floor and then in the stairs on the third floor. So it was just this really big, complex setup. And the man who had set it all up and who was getting all the children's attention and everything was speaking both in Dutch and English. So we got the absolute privilege and joy to be able to understand and see what was going on, and it was really fun. We went from the Nemo Museum to the Rijksmuseum, and the Rijksmuseum was where they had about 800 years of history in various things like paintings. They had cabinets, they had furniture and chairs, all very ornately decorated, used by various nobility. They had sculptures, I mean, combs, almost everything that you could possibly think of that would be really cool to see in a museum that somebody had used hundreds of years ago. It's always fascinating to see history and how things like culture has changed over the years, especially when you can see it all presented together and how something was displayed or artistically presented this way 200 years ago, but 600 years ago was this, and it's all just very fascinating. And if you're a history junkie like me, if you like going to museums, then it would have definitely been a great place for you to walk through too. But beside the museums, we also walked around a great deal. We paid for a boat ride that took us down the canal, where we heard more about the history of, and that's actually where I learned where some of the structures, the buildings, and the reason why they weaved the way they did was because they used to be on waterways. While we were on the canal tour, the tour guide pointed out a bridge called the Peter Muirberg Bridge, and it was named after him because he smuggled 350 Jewish children out of Amsterdam during World War II. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. We were also able to see from the canal where Anne Frank's father worked and where eventually her family, plus the others, hid during World War II. The last museum we went to in Amsterdam was the Van Gogh Museum, because Van Gogh was born in the Netherlands, and I was really impacted by the museum. I didn't really know a lot about Van Gogh. I know that he had a lot of personal issues and that he cut off his ear. I can recognize his art, but there was a lot of information, obviously, because it was a museum about him, that I had no idea. I found myself really struck by how much he had done. And it's a shame that he didn't experience his popularity during his life. It's really a shame that he can't see how popular he has become and how much people enjoy his work. Before I talk about my most favorite part of Amsterdam, I will just add a few impressions that I had. For starters, I had a few people ask me if we had any problems with not knowing the language, and I will say no. Everyone spoke English. Everyone seemed very happy to speak English. My husband does speak German, and the only frustration that he had was he found himself trying to speak German to them when they speak Dutch. So he had to remind himself, this is not German, it's Dutch, and they can't understand me. But it was never really an issue. Everyone was very kind. They all spoke English, and we got around just fine. I will also say there is a huge frustration that I have against the hotel rooms in Europe, at least the shoestring budget hotel rooms that we went to, because for whatever reason, they did not finish off the shower stalls. For whatever reason, they just left the wall, and the other half was wide open. So every shower that we took, we just basically got the rest of the very tiny bathroom wet. The other thing I had to get used to was the water. Here in America, when you sit down and ask for water, your server will just keep bringing you water, topping you off, and pouring water in your glass even if you don't ask for it. It's just, here's water, there you go, drink as much as you want. In Europe, you have to pay for the water, and you have to be very specific that you don't want the weird tasting vitamin, mineral, whatever it is, sparkling water. You want the just classic, natural, please don't put anything in it water. And then you can get about that big of a glass out of it, especially between the three of us. So with having dysautonomia and really needing to be careful with my hydration, that was something I had to adjust to. I didn't, obviously my husband and my daughter too, all of us didn't want to get dehydrated, but with my dysautonomia, it was very important that I continue having water going through my system. And so that was just an adjustment. But we did find some grocery stores here and there where we could get big bottles of water that was just normal, classic water, didn't have all the weird, sparkly, minerally, weird tasting stuff in it. And I was able to get through it okay. The food was delicious. Being able to go to fresh bakeries in the morning and get some ginormous and fresh croissants, or brötchen, or pastries. I pretty much found anything that was a pastry with chocolate in it and devoured that. That's something I miss. Not very healthy breakfasts, but we were walking miles a day, so I felt very justified in the amount of food that I ate, and the amount of sugar and ice cream and all the other things that I ate pretty much every day. And even the large portions of food that I ate every day, I said, you know what, we're on vacation, and we walked all of it off. So, but I do miss the food. It was very good. I'm going to end this video, at least the talking part, before I put the pictures up, with my favorite part of visiting Amsterdam, and that has to be visiting where Anne Frank and her family and the others hid during World War II. It was extremely emotional for me. It was very sobering, and I'm so happy that I was able to walk through where Anne Frank walked through and the other beautiful souls that were there. Anne Frank was such a huge part of my elementary years, and not just because it was part of our required reading. When I was in 7th grade, I did duet acting with a friend of mine, and we did a skit about Anne Frank. And she actually played Anne Frank herself, and I played Margaret, her sister. And we won first place. But I remember as we were practicing for our skits over and over again, learning the lines, and we had a director who was helping us. The director would say things like, try to put yourself in their shoes and try to think about what this line really means and how she really would respond to this, thinking about everything else that was going on in context of the war, in context of hiding, and they have to be quiet. And I think that really, doing that skit, I think that really brought home a lot of what I had already read in the diary, and then the fact that this war was just, it was devastating. At the same time, I was learning these lines and having already read Anne Frank's diary and trying to put myself into the shoes of someone whose experience I couldn't even begin to understand. I was also learning a little bit about my own ancestral history. And my mother's father's mother was Jewish, and she and her husband came from Russia to America during World War II. I have since learned through 23andMe that I have Ashkenazi Jewish heritage. As I was putting these all together, my own heritage and what I was learning and understanding with this girl named Anne Frank, whose diary I read, it stirred in me a desire to read more about what happened during World War II and to get my hands on as many autobiographies as I could. We were not allowed to take pictures while we were walking through the building where Anne Frank and the others hid, but I was very grateful that they had these little recording devices each individual had, and you can scan the numbers of in the rooms where you are, and you can listen to just yourself personally. You can listen to the information that they give, and everyone in there was very quiet. Everyone was very respectful. It was crowded. You had to get tickets for certain times, otherwise they wouldn't let you in. There's a constant stream of people walking through here of all differing ages, probably all differing nationalities. I was very pleased to see that after so many years, still others are also taking this very seriously and giving it the sober respect that it deserves. They had interviews of people who had survived and were talking about people who knew what happened to them. Otto Frank was also interviewed, and listening to his interview made me cry. He was talking about the day they were found. It was so sobering, and my heart just breaks for them over and over again, that he would have to survive that and come back and relive those memories, knowing that he's the only one of his family who did survive. And there were interviews of the people who helped them, give them food and things like that. And they had preserved some relics, and there was very few things, like a book. I think there was one of the books that Anne Frank was reading. It was in Dutch, so I couldn't read it, but I can't remember what else they had. I think there was some kind of newspaper clipping, and then they also had things set up, like a bed, which was not hers, but they set some things up to kind of give you an idea of how things were. But then we walked into where the kitchen area was, and all of that was preserved, and it was the original, and there are signs everywhere saying not to touch anything. The bookcase that covered the stairwell up to where they were hiding was the original one. They had it kind of they had it angled in such a way where you could get past it and up the stairwell, but you could also see the bookcase. But of course, that was also under behind plexiglass and things like that, and signs everywhere saying not to touch it because it was preserved, and everything that was on the bookshelf, that was all original. And it was, I can't really explain what it felt like to walk through a place like that, knowing what happened, knowing what was going on, having read her diary, thinking about the everydayness of having to be quiet. And I'm so grateful that we were able to do that and buy the ticket for the time that we were there. I'm glad that we could walk up those steps and experience that, see some of the relics that were left behind. I'm glad that I'm thankful that Otto Frank survived, even though I can't even imagine. I just can't imagine the grief that he had, but he was able to find her diary and publish it. And otherwise it would not have been published, and we would not have seen this glimpse of this young child, and like I said, the everydayness of her life that was so mixed with the usual fights with sisters and the usual not getting along with other people in cramped places, but then with a background of such terror, and yet how she was able to have so much hope through it still and believe that people are still good inside. Well, I know I could probably film many videos and talk very exclusively just on me processing being able to walk up where Anne Frank hid, but that's not why you're here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the talking part of this video, and I'm going to put up some pictures for you of Amsterdam, and my next video will be about our weekend in Paris.